Hi friends, Angelica here for Scrapbook.com. Today we are making backgrounds. I'm going to show how I made these two backgrounds using Distress Oxide inks and Distress Spritz. The colors that we will be using are Barn Door and Uncharted Mariner. I'm also going to be using mixed media paper. I have Fa La La Sentiments and decorative snowflake die set. Okay, so we're going to start with the backgrounds, and I did a quick spritz of the Uncharted Mariner. And once I sprayed the paper, I'm going to spray it with water and do just a little bit of ink smooshing, trying to pick up any pigment that's on my mat. I am going to be drying the panel in between each layer. So for now, I'm using my travel blow dryer that has a lower heat setting than my heat tool. But this paper is really thick. It's really heavyweight. So I did have to move over to my heat tool just to kind of help speed up that drying process. But right now, we are going to start playing with Distress Oxide inks. I did a quick swipe of Uncharted Mariner and Tumbled Glass, sprayed it with a little bit of water, and then I also sprayed it with the Distress Spritz. If you're not familiar with Distress Spritz, what it does is it brings a lot of shimmer to your project. When you spray the panel alone, it doesn't bring a lot of color, though you will have a lot of shimmer on your paper. But when you pair it with any color from the Distress family, it just really elevates that color and just gives it a beautiful pearlescent shimmer to your projects. I did use the shimmer, I think, every other layer. I was also using the tumbled glass, but it really was not bringing any color to my panels, so I did put that ink away, and now I'm just focusing on Uncharted Mariner. And I have a lot of white space still on my panels, so I am just going to quickly push my paper where those white spaces are into the ink. Now, if you want to have more control of where the ink is going on your panel, you can pick that ink up with acetate and just smush it into your panel where you want the ink to be. I do like how this panel looks, and I kind of wish I kept it right here, but I did decide to add one more layer of the Distress Spritz, and I just sprayed that right onto the panel. It did flatten the panel out a little bit, kind of drowned the background that I just made out, so I decided to do one last ink smooshing, but just with the spritz. And the spritz is really movable, so by doing that I was able to break up a lot of the areas and make it a bit more distressed looking. Now you can see how shimmery this panel is, and it's also warped from all the water and heat that I put on it. So I'm going to spray the back of this panel with water, and the panel is still a little damp. I'm going to sit that under my Misty and just let it dry under the Misty. And then I have a lot of staining on my mat, so I sprayed the mat with a blue stamp cleaner, and several companies make this stamp cleaner. I'll link one down below. And it just cleaned my mat up perfectly. While the blue panel is drying, we're going to make a red panel. So I started with Quiche Flamingo and Festive Berries, did some swipes on my craft mat and a spray of water. I'm just going to quickly slide my panel through that ink and dry this panel. And now I'm going to use Lumberjack Plaid. The Festive Berries just didn't bring a lot of red to the panel, but the Lumberjack Plaid is a super vibrant, cool toned red, and a little goes a long way. So I'm going to be pretty soft with how much ink I'm going to put on my mat. I also sprayed the panel with Barn Door Spritz, Distress Spritz, and a little bit of that spritz onto the ink that was still on my mat. So I'm going to do some more ink smooshing here. And if ink smooshing is not something you've tried before, I highly recommend trying it out, because this is one of my favorite things to do with ink and paper. You just need to make sure that you have the right paper to do this. So I would recommend an expensive, like student grade watercolor paper, or this mixed media paper. This is such a heavyweight paper. It really can take in all of the water that I'm using. I did push this paper to the limit because I wanted to see how much water and how much ink I can get away with, how many layers I can put on this paper before it just stops soaking in the ink. And as you can see, I put a lot of layers down on these panels and they turned out gorgeous. So yeah, I'm super impressed with this paper, and I've been using it for a while, and I think like every time I use it, I just push it a little harder just to see what I can do with it. I did want to make the panel a little bit richer, so I brought back out lumberjack plaid and an ink blender, and I'm just making the edges of this panel darker with that ink. You can see that the panel has a little bit of a curl to it, so I am also going to spray this panel, the back of it, with a little bit of water and let it sit under my MISTI for about an hour, and it's going to take most of that curl out. Once I was ready to work with this panel again, I used my Scrapbook.com white luster pen to add some white splatter to this background. And I just pushed the sides of the pen to get some of this ink to come down into my brush and just quickly tapped it onto the panel. You do need to let the panel dry for a couple minutes or you will smear that ink. So once the panel was dry, now I'm going to use rub-ons to bring a little bit more interest to the background. I'm using Scrapbook.com's Vintage Scripts rub-on transfers, and this is the white. It does come in several colors, and there are scripts in this package and music notes. So on the red panel, I am going to use the script transfers, and these are so easy to use. You just cut them to whatever size you want, and I'm pushing it hard down into the panel, and then I'm going to use the popsicle stick that is included in the package just to make sure I really have that transfer connected to my panel. And it is also very important that your panel is dry, especially if you're doing a process like I did. If that paper is not dry, when you pull the acetate back, like what I'm doing right now, it will pull the top layer of your paper off. So make sure your paper is completely dry before putting rub-ons onto your panel. And I do know this because it happened to me. So please learn from my mistake. Make sure your panel is dry. Now, I am not going to cover this whole panel with transfers. I am just going to use it sporadically throughout the panel. So I actually did not use a lot of transfers on either panel from this sheet. And these sheets are fairly inexpensive. So something like this with the script and the music notes, this particular transfer, this is going to last me a long time because this is exactly how I'm going to be using it, just a little on each panel. I'm going to move the transfer around that's still on the acetate, just around the panel to see where I would like these scripts to be, and you can see I can flip the transfer over too. You can't see what these words are, so it doesn't matter what direction that they're in. It's just like very old-fashioned, a little faded out, distressed, cursive writing, but there's no words to it. It's just this really pretty pattern. I used 2 small rectangles of scripts for this panel, and I tried to use all of the script that was in the panel, even if it was just one line, and just put it so they weren't even. Almost, to me, it looks almost like exposed brick, and it was just another way to bring white to the panel besides just the white splatter. So I'm going to do the same thing on the blue panel, this time with the music notes. I am adding a little bit of chipped sapphire to the edges of this panel just to make it a little richer, and I splattered it with the white pen, and now I'm adding the music notes. I am going to speed this process up a little bit because I am doing the same exact thing that I did with the script transfers. I'm just going to work around the edges, and the reason why I'm keeping the rub-ons on the edges is because I'm going to put a big snowflake in the middle of the panels. So there was no reason for me to put a rub-on in the middle of the panel because I was just going to cover it with the snowflake. The snowflakes that I will be using are from the Snowflakes decorative die set from Scrapbook.com, and I die cut them from Nina Solar White 110-pound cardstock. This is a pretty heavyweight cardstock, and these are intricate dies. So I ran them through my electronic die cut machine with a metal shim, so I had really good clean cuts. And I die cut 2 of each snowflake so I can stack and glue them together. And then I'm just going to do that off screen because it did take a couple minutes to add glue to all the small pieces of this snowflake. And then I just glued them right onto the panels. And you can see I am using the smallest amount of glue to the back of these snowflakes. When I attach them to the panels, I don't want to activate the Oxide inks or the Spritz. So I'm being very gentle with the position. I'm not moving that snowflake around too much, and that kept the snowflakes nice and clean, no ink on them. And now I'm going to do some sentiments. I want to heat emboss these sentiments. And I picked a few from Wordfetti Fa La La sentiment stamp set. I love the size of these sentiments. They're super tiny. You do not need to push hard if you're stamping with your MISTI. I am barely rubbing my finger over these words. I just want that embossing ink to touch my panel because I'm going to be adding embossing powder over the words, and I do not want to lose any lines in those words. So I was very careful of putting the embossing ink on the panel, and I'm using Brutus Monroe embossing powders on top of the sentiments. I used my heat tool to melt the embossing powders, and then I cut the sentiments down to small strips so they would sit nicely on the center of these snowflakes. I attached them to the snowflakes with 1 millimeter thin strips, so they had a really nice dimension. And now we're going to take one last look at these panels. You can see that has the beautiful shimmer to it. The just small amount of transfers really help elevate these panels, especially this red. I love how this red panel turned out. Now, if ink splatter and transfers really aren't your thing, I also made one just with the ink smooshing. So you can see what the difference is adding the other details to the back of the panel. That is going to finish today's video. I will link all of the products that I use down below, and I will also link my gallery. If you go over to my gallery at Scrapbook.com, you're going to see all of the projects that I've made, and then there's always a supply list that are with the projects. If you would like to see more projects like this, I will also leave a link to my YouTube channel. I love playing with paper and inks, so you will find a lot more projects like this over there. And you always want to make sure you stop by the coupon page if you want to do any shopping at Scrapbook.com. So I will leave a link to that coupon page too, so you can go and grab whatever sales code is available for that day and see what the free goodies are. That is all that I have. I want to thank you so much for hanging out with me. Take care, friends.